E. Every day he came to my house, my nephew. He had no reason to, really. It was just a habit for him, a routine. He wasn't in school yet, so his parents were often busy with work. And I suppose I was the next best option. I didn't mind. He was a sweet child, full of energy. I loved spending time with him. But the day he saw, everything changed. I'll never forget that moment. The look in his eyes, the way his world, his innocent little world, shattered in a single second. I never thought he'd find out, never imagined he would ever witness it. I didn't know it would ruin everything, but it did. And the consequences? Well, they still haunt me. He came by like he always did, the way he usually did after school. But this time, something was different. I should have known, should have felt it in my gut, but I was so wrapped up in the lie I was living I didn't even see it coming. He always knocked first. It was cute, really. His little hands would tap on the door, and I'd greet him with a smile like the kind of aunt everyone would want to have. But that day, I opened the door and froze. I shouldn't have been standing there, shouldn't have been where I was. I thought I had time, but he was standing there staring. Not at me, but past me. What he saw that day, I can't describe in words. It's burned into my mind and I can still see it. Every single detail. He'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. The worst part? I didn't even realize what I was doing until it was too late. I wanted to shut the door, push him away, tell him it was nothing. But I was frozen. My breath caught in my throat, and all I could hear was the sound of his little voice breaking the silence. Why is he here? His words were so innocent, yet so sharp, so piercing. I felt my heart stop. I didn't know how to explain. How could I? What could I say? How could I tell him that his beloved aunt, the woman who had always been there for him, who he looked up to, was living a lie? A lie so big it would destroy everything. I didn't know what to do. So I just stood there. My eyes locked onto his, and all I saw was confusion. A child who had just seen something no child should ever have to see. His gaze shifted from me to the man in my house. A man who shouldn't have been there. Not in that way. I had told myself for so long that I could keep this secret, that I could keep it under wraps and protect him from the truth. But now, the truth was staring him in the face, and there was no hiding it. His eyes flickered between the man and me, his tiny mind trying to make sense of what he had just walked into. I wanted to take it all back, to erase the moment. But it was too late. I thought I could control it. I thought I could live two lives and keep everything separate. But the moment he saw, everything unraveled. That was the turning point. And I'm not sure I can ever fix it. The man in my house, he was everything I told myself I didn't need. He was everything I shouldn't have wanted. But here he was, standing there in my living room, his eyes locked on mine, waiting for me to explain. But how could I? How could I explain the storm that had taken over my life? How could I explain the complicated emotions, the guilt, the fear, the need that had pushed me to this point? But I didn't have to explain. Not to the man, and certainly not to my nephew. The look in my nephew's eyes said it all. He knew. He understood more than I could have ever anticipated. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice a whisper, his eyes wide with confusion. I wanted to hide, to run away from the question, but I couldn't. This child who had never seen me like this was suddenly seeing me for what I truly was. A woman lost in her own mess. Trapped in a life of lies, mistakes, and secrets. A woman who didn't even know how to get out of the situation she had created. It was all so wrong. So wrong. I tried to think of something to say. Anything to calm him down, to make him forget what he had seen. But nothing came. The silence stretched between us, a silent accusation hanging in the air. And that's when I realized I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't hide. The truth had already been exposed. What would I do now? How would I fix this? I forced a smile, but it felt hollow. It's nothing. Sweetie, just a misunderstanding. I'll explain later. But I knew deep down that there was no explanation that would make any of this right. He didn't need to understand the complexities of my life. He didn't need to know that I was slipping into a world of deceit, a world where nothing made sense anymore. But he knew. He knew enough to see the cracks in the facade. The man in the room didn't speak. He just stood there watching the whole thing unfold. I hated him for it. I hated that he was part of this, part of the secret I was desperately trying to keep hidden. I hated that he was the reason for my downfall. But the truth was, I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop him from being there, from complicating everything, from making my life spiral even further. And that man, I didn't want to admit it, but he was the one thing that had kept me hanging on, the one thing that had made me feel alive in ways I hadn't in years. But at what cost? What was I willing to sacrifice for this dangerous, consuming need? But I wasn't thinking clearly, not anymore. And the worst part? My nephew was the first to see it. He was the first to see me for who I truly was, and now he was stuck with that knowledge. He didn't say anything else. He just turned, slowly, and walked away. I didn't try to stop him. I didn't have the strength to. As he left, I felt like I was losing something I couldn't get back. Not just my nephew's innocence, but my own sense of self. Everything had been so clear before. But now, it was all a blur. I didn't hear from him the next day. Or the next. He stopped coming over. He didn't even reply to my calls. And I knew. I knew that this was it. This was the breaking point. The moment I had feared had come true. I had lost him. I had lost my nephew's trust. And I wasn't sure how I was going to fix it. I wasn't sure I could. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just my nephew I had lost. It was something far worse, something I had never expected to lose. The silence between us stretched on for days. I didn't hear from him, I didn't see him, my heart ached. Not just for what I had done to him, but for what I had lost within myself. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to explain the mess I had made. The tangled web of emotions, desires, and decisions that had led me to this point. And even if I could explain it, would he even understand? Could he ever forgive me? So here I am, stuck in the aftermath, stuck in the wake of my own mistakes. I don't know how to move forward, but I can't go back. I can't erase the past, can't undo what's been done. All I can do is live with it, and hope against everything that maybe one day he'll come back. Maybe one day he'll forgive me. Maybe one day he'll understand. But until then, I'll wait. Because the truth, once exposed, can never be hidden again. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't shake the haunting emptiness that surrounded me. My nephew never came back to the house. Every time I would look at the door expecting to hear his familiar knock, it remained silent. I told myself it was for the best, that he needed time, that maybe he would come around. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. It wasn't just time he needed. It was a complete overhaul of everything I had ever stood for. And that wasn't something I could give him. I still remembered the look on his face that day, the confusion, the hurt. It was as if I had ripped away a piece of his innocence, a piece of me too. If I'm being honest, the guilt ate away at me, gnawing at my insides every single day. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror without seeing the reflection of the woman who had betrayed not just a child, but her entire family. How do you make amends for something so destructive? How do you piece together the remnants of a life shattered by your own choices? Was there even a way back from this? I wasn't sure anymore. Weeks passed, and I couldn't get him out of my mind. It wasn't just the guilt that consumed me. It was the fear of what would happen next. What if this wasn't just a passing phase? What if my nephew's silence was permanent? What if I had destroyed the most important relationship in my life? I thought about my sister, his mother. She had always trusted me with him. Had I betrayed her too? The secrets I had been keeping were no longer just mine to bear. They were infecting everything, poisoning the very relationships that had once been my anchor. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deep this hole went, how far-reaching the damage was. And then, as if the universe had been waiting for me to fully understand, I heard the knock on the door. His knock. The one I had been dreading, yet longing for. I opened the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Standing there was my nephew. His eyes, still wide with the confusion I had seen weeks before, met mine. There was no warmth in them, no spark of the playful boy who used to race around my living room, only a cold distance. I couldn't tell whether it was anger, or if he had simply shut down the part of himself that had trusted me. Either way, it was worse than I had feared. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, staring at me, waiting. And in that silence, the weight of everything I had done hit me harder than it ever had before. What would he say? What would he do? Would he confront me with everything he had witnessed? Or would he retreat further into silence? In that moment, everything was on the line. I took a deep breath and braced myself for whatever was coming. Then, he spoke. His voice was quiet. Almost too quiet, as if he didn't trust it to carry the weight of what he had to say. "Why did you let him stay?" he asked. His words pierced through me like a blade, and I couldn't answer. How could I? How could I explain the pull I had felt, the need I had ignored, the mistake I had made? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He looked past me, eyes scanning the room as if trying to find something that made sense. "Why did you do it? I thought you were different. You were supposed to protect me." His words were like a slap, each one harder than the last. I felt small, so small. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. I let them fall, each one a testament to the regret I had been carrying for weeks. I had ruined everything, and I didn't know how to fix it. There were no words that could make it right, no actions that could undo the damage I had caused. But he didn't leave. He didn't walk away. Even though he could have. He stayed there, his eyes still locked on mine, waiting. He had every right to walk away, every right to never speak to me again. And yet, there he was, standing in front of me, demanding the answers I didn't have. But in that moment, I realized something. Maybe there was hope. Maybe there was a way to salvage this. If he was willing to stay, maybe that was my chance to fix the unfixable. I wiped my tears and finally found my voice. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I made a terrible mistake, and I don't expect you to understand. But I need you to know. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to lose you." He didn't say anything. He just stared at me, as if deciding whether or not to believe me. For a moment, I wondered if my words were enough to bring him back. Or if the damage had already been done. "Do you even love me?" he asked, his voice trembling just slightly. Those words were like a punch to the stomach. I wanted to say yes, but how could I? Love was supposed to be unconditional. It was supposed to protect, and all I had done was destroy. I shook my head, unable to answer. How could I answer that question honestly without causing more harm? How could I explain that love had become tangled with so many other things, so many mistakes? I was standing on the edge. One wrong word, one wrong move, and I would lose him forever. But I had already lost so much. What was one more piece of my heart compared to the wreckage I had already caused? He looked at me, his expression unreadable. And then, after what felt like an eternity, he turned and walked away. The door closed behind him with a finality I couldn't ignore. And in that moment, I knew. I knew that this was it, the point of no return. The damage was done. The truth had been exposed, and there was no undoing it. All I could do now was wait for the pieces to fall where they may. I don't know what will happen next. I don't know if my nephew will ever speak to me again. I don't know if I will ever be able to fix what I've broken. But one thing is certain. I can't go back. The truth has been laid bare, and there's no hiding from it now. I'll never forget the look in his eyes, the way he saw me, truly saw me, for the first time. And I'll never forget the silence that followed. It's a silence that will haunt me forever, but maybe, just maybe, it will be the thing that drives me to finally make things right.